Welcome. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at this Mamiya C220 medium format camera and how to get started on it. This video assumes that you have some background knowledge in photography, a basic understanding of the exposure triangle, your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and maybe a little bit of a working knowledge of film photography as well. At least just a passing familiarity will do. This video should get you up and running on a camera such as this. We're going to cover how to check this for film. We're going to cover all of the various buttons, the switches, the mechanical operations, because this camera has no batteries in it. We're going to cover how to use the viewfinder. We will then cover how to load the film, how to set your exposures, and how to take a photo. So, let's begin. Before anything else, you may already have film in your camera. You may have picked up a used one. There could be film in there. This is called found film. It's often an exciting thing. Usually you don't find weird stuff. You find something interesting. People get excited about found film. There are two ways to check whether or not you have film in there before you open up the film compartment. The first one is going to be this little window here. Since this one reads 12, 13, sort of in the middle, that means there's a full roll of film in there, no doubt. As soon as this door opens, this will recount to 0. So it's assuming that somebody left film in there. The other way is actually by turning this. Number one, it will turn freely, it won't stop. Number two, you will hear the paper flap of the film as it goes around. Right, about there, it's just a little. We'll compare that to how we hear it otherwise. Once I hear the paper flap, I know that the film is all the way around, wound onto the top roll, and it would be safe to remove it. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. To do that, we'll use this knob. We'll turn it clockwise, and this can trip people up thinking the camera's now stuck. It actually is a switch, and you'll hear the camera pop open at that point. Now, to remove your film, we'll be using these two pegs here whenever we're dealing with film. Just using the top one, pulling it out and rotating it allows it to stay out. My film is now popping out. You want to be very careful with this film at this point. We have exposed. Leaving this out for even just a couple of days can cause a little bit of light to seep in around the edges. Best thing to do at that point is grab some tin foil and wrap it up for later. Now, while we're in here, one thing we want to double check is this panel here. 120 or 220. Those are different types of film. 220 is a longer roll of film. If your camera is set to 220, it will count past the 12 exposures that you get out of a roll of 120 film. You don't want that to happen, and since nobody makes 220 film anymore, it's pretty safe to assume that you will be using 120. This panel can simply be pushed back and forth. There's one other setting that concerns this that we will deal with later. You want to make sure it's on 120. At this point, while there's no film in the camera, it's a safe time to close it up. You should click on both sides, rotate it to the left to lock it. We can go ahead and close that. And now is a safe time to start playing with our camera. Now, a few other things to cover before we get to the good stuff. There are a couple of other settings on this camera that we need to go over. One of the most important, as alluded to while we had the back open, is the 120-220 distinction. This is the other place where you need to make sure that is set. To the right is 220, to the left is 120. That is how the camera will correctly count your number of exposures. Down below that is this little knob, single, multi. That refers to whether or not you want to take double exposures. This can be a fun skill to learn, exposing the same frame of film twice. It causes an interesting effect. You probably don't want to start there. This is a nice feature that the camera has, as if I want to take a picture on single, Well, it won't let me because there's no film in the camera, so I can't wind it to the next exposure. It will prevent me from accidentally exposing the same frame twice, which, as you're learning, could be easy to do. If I switch it to multi, I can take pictures as many times as I want, with or without winding the film next. Single prevents accidents. Next up, lock and unlock. This one is a little bit counterintuitive, as lock actually means that the camera is unlocked. So when I wind it, I wish to take a picture, it's on lock, I can take a picture. Now, if I set it to unlock, suddenly I can't take a picture. Let's say you've set your camera, but you decided not to take the picture. You want to tuck it in your backpack. Best to switch this to unlock. Think of it more as instructions. You need to unlock the camera before you can take a picture. You should lock the camera when you're done. Next up, we'll need to get into the viewfinder itself. To open your viewfinder, turn to this here. Open slowly because things spring open. And voila, we can dive on in. Once you have the viewfinder open, you'll be looking at a view something like this. What you may notice is these two lines in the top. Those are not issues or aberrations. They are instead there to help you level the horizon. So you may also notice everything comes mirrored in this. You try to get the lamp in there, you move it that way, things happen opposites. That will take some getting used to. The horizon lines will really help you when you're handhold trying to set this up. The next thing you may notice is the red line. That just means your lock mechanism on the left-hand side of the camera is set to unlock. Think of it as it is telling you to unlock the camera so that you may take the picture. Last thing of note, the front tab of your viewfinder window. Pushing it open reveals a magnifying glass. You'll have to get very close to it to use it, but the other thing that I love about optical viewfinders is how incredibly sharp the images come through. On a digital camera, I'm often guessing whether things are in focus. I do not have that problem on this. Add in the magnifying glass, and I am certain every time that my photo is perfectly as in focus as can be. Now with the viewfinder squared away, before we actually put in film, now's a good time to cover exposure management on a camera like this. You will find that everything is on the lens itself. You may be more familiar with traditional cameras. Aperture happens to be on the lens on this one, shutter speed on the camera body, ISO likewise on the camera body. You don't tell this camera what your ISO is, or you're shooting with film, so film speed. A film speed of 400 corresponds to an ISO of 400. Now everything comes on the lens itself. You can actually remove the lens and see this in operation. A small tab in here will allow you to push this lever down and out to remove the lens should you ever need to clean anything. One thing you will notice is, unlike most cameras again, there are two sets of aperture blades. One in the front simply exposes the shutter speed to the aperture that you have set in the back. Now setting your shutter speed to bulb will allow us to activate the spring mechanism. From there, I will trigger the shutter. You will see the rear shutter. That simply controls your aperture. Everything else pretty familiar. You'll recognize typical f-stops, typical shutter speeds, and we can return the lens to the camera. I recommend fiddling about with this for a bit. Set your camera to multi, so it will allow you to just fiddle around, get used to how this all works. Have some clicks, it feels good. Remember that when it's locked, you can't do anything. Don't forget to unlock your camera. Enjoy for a little while. Get used to the way things feel, and then we can start getting into film. One other thing first, however, it can be a bit of a doozy to figure out your exposure, to get those things right, to calculate it just off the top of your head. You might not have sprung for a light meter. You probably have a camera sitting around. This digital camera that I'm filming this with is one option. Another film camera is another simple option. This will allow you to put in, let's see, I have 50 speed film in here. If I turn it to 400, I say I want to shoot with an aperture of f8. I'll put it into program mode. I'll look through the viewfinder at my subject, and the camera will tell me within the viewfinder what kind of shutter speed I need. If I need to adjust 1/30th, not really going to cut it. I'll try 5.6, and that should do the trick for me. Now, getting ready to actually take a photo. Your camera over as before. Open her up. Now, grabbing your film, opening it up, removing the paper band that keeps it all wound up. What you'll find is this paper tab, the all-important paper tab. Now, let's set that here for a moment. The spool typically be found in the bottom. You want to make sure it's in the top. Remember how we did these before, pulling them out, rotating them slightly so they remain out, and you can remove your films. Now, I'm going to line this one up. Bottom one is not as particular as the top, which can be a bit of a pain. I recommend getting that peg about 90 degrees, lining this up as carefully as you can. Try to get this one straight on first before proceeding. There we go, to the other side. Twist that. Okay, everything's snug, everything's happy. I will rotate this to where that flap is showing. I will pull this tab across and insert into that slot. From there, I will place a finger on here. I will start winding across. Make sure that stays in its slot. I will stop winding when I see these arrows appear. Red dots inside the film box here. I want the arrows to line up just with those. Now, the camera, through its acts of magic, will be able to count your film exposures as you go through them. Closing it up, you should hear a click on both sides. Rotate to lock. Double check that that's 120. Now is your last chance to change that. You don't want to open the film box halfway through. Of course, you will ruin most of your roll of film. Turning over here, since I've opened the door, the exposure counter now reads 0. Oh, gonna set that to single just to be safe while we can. Actually going to set you to lock. Let's have no accidents happen. You can begin winding your new roll of film. It will go through a series of dots. There will be a little bit of resistance at times. Careful, be slow through those. It's fine. Just move through it slowly. And we've reached our first frame of film. From here, you can set single. You can set your exposures as you like. Wind the film. Switch to unlock. Open up your viewfinder. Manage your focus as you see fit. Push down on the shutter trigger. And with that, you're off to the races.